Good morning. My name's Alexandra and I'm a conference director at Corinium Global Intelligence. Today, I'm chatting with one of the speakers from our Chief Data and Analytics Office series, Martin Knell, who is Head of Data and Analytics at Goodstart Early Learning. Thanks for joining me today, Martin.
Thanks for having me here, Alex.
Now, Martin, just for the listeners who don't know Goodstart, can you explain for us kind of who you are?
Yes, sure. We are the largest childcare and early learning provider in Australia. Many people know us once they have small children. We have 650 centers across the country, and we look after 70,000 children with 15,000 educators. We are also one of the largest not-for-profits in the region. We have reached about 1.3 billion revenue now. And as the NFP status would suggest, we are not paying shareholders. Any surplus that we make goes back into our centers or is used to drive programs, particularly for vulnerable children.
Thank you for that great introduction to yourselves and what it is you're doing. And I guess when you think about AI and machine learning, an early learning centre isn't the place where you imagine these kind of innovations to happen. So it'd be great to hear from you about, how you're using these technologies. A good start.
Yes, so we are using machine learning primarily as an analytics tool to create predictive models and understand important drivers to key business challenges. An example would be child safety. So that's where we took severe child injuries as a target, as you call it, and then we ran gradient boosting machines over 300 input parameters to understand those drivers that are most predictive to the injury outcome. So now we can give every center in the country a risk score. Our safety and operations teams use that to work with centers in a preventative manner. We are also able to provide our operators better guidance now, what processes they should focus on that really matter and what they should watch out for. For example, we learned a lot about the importance of the educator to child pairing consistency. We understand a lot about critical times of the day, critical activities, certain profiles of children and circumstances that might trigger higher injury risk at a point of time. And that all allows us to be really focused now and watch on the things that most matter when it comes to injury risk.
That's a fascinating project there, and I guess it's so key because you might think what the chances are of causing injuries, but actually really identifying those causes and the ways to prevent them must be such kind of revolutionary tool for you. When we kind of think about AI and machine learning, what do you think is potential for it quite generally in human services?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it has a huge potential in human services and child services in particular, because it cracks the multivariate problem. When you think about it, humans in general and children in particular, they are always influenced by about 1,000 things. And you can't just hold 999 parameters constant and change one like in a good laboratory experiment. So that means we depend on analytics tools that can deal with collinearity and that can give us the importance of one driver once adjusted for all others. And machine learning is exceptionally good in dealing with collinearity and do exactly that. In my eyes, much better equipped to deal with that than traditional statistics. So I'm pretty sure that will give us a quantum leap of insight, specifically in human services and child services.
Very exciting time for it all then. Obviously, kind of the project you're working on is working, really well. And that's actually quite unusual because according to statistics, 85% of projects will fail, which makes it quite scary for a company to make those investments in an AI project. How did you decide kind of what your use case would be and then get that company buy-in that allowed you to kind of go on that journey to develop it?
Yes, so that is a quite interesting statistic that 85% fail. And there are probably a number of reasons why this could happen, but there are two major pitfalls that come immediately to my mind. The first one is probably when analytics is not integrated with the strategy process in a company. So to stay relevant as an analytics team, you need to solve somebody's problem. Ideally, you solve a business problem or a strategic problem. The idea that analytics teams sit somewhere on an underground floor besides a server room and come up with innovation that then the rest of the business becomes excited about rarely works. It's much more promising if analytics is integrated with strategy. So what we have done, we have discussed with our board what are the key strategic challenges that the company wants to improve on in the next 3 to 5 years. And then the next question was on which of these challenges is advanced analytics likely to give us insights that help us make better decisions. And that then informed the use case catalog that we are now working down. So that's the first one, integration of analytics and strategy. The second tripfall that I often see from my experience is lack of translation skills. So, you know, at the beginning of an analytics use case, you probably will invest significant time to translate a business challenge into an analytical question. And then at the end, you again spend significant time to translate an analytical finding into a plain English business recommendation. And even experienced data scientists sometimes struggle with that. If you are lucky, you find some people who have the analytical skills and some operational experience. This is always a great unicorn. Other than that, that's where cross-functional teams come into play. So you then need to make sure that your use cases are resourced with both analysts and operators so that you get the best of theory and practice. So that's important to keep in mind too. But yes, these are at least two. When I see ML AI projects in particular failing, then it's probably because they are not integrated with the strategy process. They are working on the wrong question, so to speak, or due to the lack of translation skills.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I guess kind of that integration also supports perhaps that time lag between, you know, having that initial idea and getting the results. If you understand the difficulties are perhaps slow, the length of time it might take to get that question translated and then get the results translated, you know, the teams are more open to the process and more kind of willing to accept, you know, it's not an immediate result.
Absolutely, great point.
Obviously, so once you've got your initial idea, of course, the next step is the development and the production of it. And again, here, statistics aren't in the favour of AI. McKinsey reckon that around 87% of AI projects won't make it beyond that idea and into production. Are there particular challenges or obstacles in this process that, you know, you recommend people to take into consideration?
That's a very interesting point. Yes, I read this McKinsey statistics too, and I was actually surprised that only 87% don't make it into production, because it's actually so important to leave a production model behind to fill an AI project with ongoing life. For example, in our safety case, we now have this risk scoring tool that is live. It's a production model. It updates every month, and safety and operations are using that to determine which centers they should focus on and what they should work on. Now, if we didn't leave something like that behind, the outcome of the work would have been probably a PowerPoint presentation with interesting insights that people would have gotten excited about for a while, but then ultimately it would have gone onto a virtual shelf collecting dust. So it is super important to leave some sort of tool or production model behind to fill an analytics project with ongoing life. Now, we learned a lot in that space. Our first production model took us very long because we hadn't prepared the use case with production in mind. And we learned many things. Maybe three I would give for consideration. One is modularization of code. We hadn't done that very well the first time. So organizing your code into modules along the analytics chain from data ingestion to data transformation to then running the model to then creating the inference model, that helps. I would specifically focus on the data cleaning and transformation step in the beginning. That's often overlooked. Usually when we look at an analytics pipeline, we get excited about the modeling stage, but it's actually often the data transformation stage at the beginning, where you then hit some roadblocks. That's often where data scientists do some on-the-fly feature engineering, and that bites back at you when you later try to automate it. So it's super important that that step is properly coded so that then the transformation steps work in your automation pipeline. And the last step is, again, I talked about translation skills. So it's really important that you have something like a Power BI or similar interface at the end of this pipeline that can update with new data feeds, but also presents data and findings in a way that is digestible and interpretable for frontline users. So these are just some considerations. But yes, we learned a lot, and the important thing is not to get frustrated. So it takes a while till the production machine runs really well oiled, I would say.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I think, like you say, not getting frustrated and kind of taking those learnings on is really key in that development of that process. And I think, just having that ongoing use of it is so key, because like you say, you don't want a project to be used and forgotten about. You want one that you can kind of in future build on, perhaps expand or do whatever you want, but continue getting that value from the project and not a one-off situation. I know when it comes to kind of AI projects like this, there's a lot of talk around how the cloud can support it. Have you found that cloud services have helped you in kind of developing this pipeline?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. That's exactly the stage that we are working on now at our current level of maturity at Goodstart. So up to now, we were relatively manual, to be honest with you. So we do data engineering based on SQL queries, data engineering based on SQL queries, sorry. We run our machine learning models in R. We do have an Azure data lake, of course, and a SQL data warehouse. So we have this infrastructure in place. But apart from that, not a lot of fancy products used just yet. But now we are at the stage where I need to look at how can we accelerate the analytics pipeline and structure it better. And that's where cloud services come into play. So we are now starting to introduce the Azure Machine Learning Studio with Azure Machine Learning pipelines. We have started introducing Databricks for the transformation stage. And that is really valuable because it really accelerates the pipeline, right? It will ultimately allow me to do a use case in 2 or 3 months that would otherwise take me 6 months. And it's also important because it forces teams along this structure that I mentioned in terms of sequential modules. It makes it easier for different team members to contribute to the same problem and these things. So big potential. And I'm saying Azure because we are invested in Azure, but I'm sure that AWS, Google Cloud, IBM, they all provide similar services. And that's indeed the next step for us.
Yeah, thank you for that. I guess it's quite an exciting time for you to have this opportunity to really speed up and kind of, what you're doing a bit more now. So you have those steps and those lessons learned and how you take that and you can really speed up and go into the next project. I think what's also kind of good with what you were saying there is you don't necessarily need to invest in this straight away. Perhaps taking that time on the first project, getting to know what you want to do, and then you might look towards the cloud and these kind of processes and make it quicker and easier for the next project.
Actually, a very good point too, Alex. So obviously, often when we think about AI, ML, we think about IoT networks and everything that then gets really expensive. But yes, to have a predictive model, you need a data lake, you need R or Python, and a good data scientist. That's what it starts with. That's exactly right.
Yeah, definitely doesn't need that crazy investment on the get-go. You don't need IoT powered toys across all the centres. But I guess kind of building on that, what is next? There's so much that can be done with all the data you have and the different technologies that are out there. So what projects do you have in mind for next?
Yes, there is a lot in the pipeline for us still. So one of our next playgrounds, I think, needs to be unstructured data. For example, we are getting a lot of really valuable full text feedback from our parents. Centers use that locally, of course, to read this feedback and then react to it. But we don't yet have really sophisticated text mining capabilities to then mine this globally and screen for trends and the like. So that's certainly one of the next playgrounds. And another area that we are getting very excited about, as you would expect, is use of tech for education outcomes. So in September, we are getting a roundtable together with experts from universities and industries to discuss exactly that. How can we use technology to support education outcomes for young children. As we know, this has gone into universities and school by now, and I think early years is next. Don't be scared, children will still have loving human educators looking after them, but I think there is a lot that technology can do to enhance and support education outcomes, and I'm getting quite excited about this too.
Oh, definitely. There is so much that technology can do. And I guess the personalization side of it that perhaps comes with technology is really unique to kind of supporting children. So very, very exciting time for you guys.
Thank you, Alex.
Well, thank you so much for your time and your insights there, Martin. I look forward to seeing you on stage again. I know you're joining us at the CDAO Brisbane show next year in March. And so we'll hear more about your experiences and your updates then. Thanks now.
I look forward to it too. Thanks for having me here.